Okay,
Almost.
come on. Here. Probably have to get some startup.
5 seconds. Right on. Go.
Alrighty. Uh, Good afternoon. It's the 6th of May. Other things tonight will include, I think, sports, maybe not. Um, and writing, maybe not. Writing will come right after. I don't recall any other things, but I didn't look at the schedule. We're going to talk about this what I'm put up today, both today and tomorrow. It is the stuff that I normally put in as background. Sometimes I put the whole piece in, not to appropriate anyone else's work as my own. It is simply to make notes and provide some observations. This and that for the coming weeks, we'll probably cover Don Monroe's book on land and urban stuff and marks. And the reason why I'm doing it is, first of all, for my own interest, and which I am self-serving in that sense, but it also provides me with a framework against which I can do my other work, which is partially what is being covered by Andy Higginbottom in his coverage of Volume 2 of Capital, which has already started. There are 3 recordings available, and we'll look a bit at a portion of that today if we have time to do it. So we can come back and go back and forth on this particular piece of page availability. So if you need to find this, the link for this is also in the Marxism section in the Discord. And if you're looking at this and you're not a member of our Discord, please come to our website and find out a little bit more about what we're doing. And I think we're experimenting with Twitch today, so that should be interesting as well. TheAutonomousCollective.net, all one word. Okie dokie. Now, I'm going to talk about Robin Hood because I've talked about Robin Hood before. And for some of us, perhaps it comes from watching too much television. My experience with Robin Hood first came, I think, not with the Errol Flynn movie, but rather with the television program with Richard Green. It's a British program. It includes most of the kind of collected different versions of Robin Hood and does it in an American TV type format of 30 minutes or 23 minutes a pop. And it's actually a nice little program and has a little cast, and you get this sense of Richard Green is this kind of Anglo-Saxon guy, and Friar Tuck is looking like a stereotypical friar, et cetera, et cetera. I am introducing today with what may be a failure. Some people consider it a failure. The Robin Hood 2010 action film, directed by Ridley Scott, starring Russell Crowe, Kate Blanchett, William Hurt, Mark Strong, Mark Addy, Oscar Isaac, Danny Houston, Eileen Atkins, and Max von Sydow. It is certainly a star vehicle, but it is also an attempt to do some justice to this massive myth that has existed probably since the 16th century, although the story itself goes back to the 13th and 12th century. And it is something that continues. It is the mythos. It is this idea of banditry, more specifically, or as Barraclough and other historians have sort of looked at it, there's this idea of social banditry. And so this story of a kind of lumpen proletarian, or maybe just simply a bandit, exists throughout a kind of history. And it has, of course, it is a resistance story. It is a guerrilla warfare story. it is a story of secession and a variety of other, overlaying things, courtly love, et cetera, et cetera. Got all that stuff in it. But the reason why I chose the Russell Crowe version and Ridley Scott, who, of course, this movie has echoes in it of other movies. It uses the same forest, for example, one of the same forest locations as the much bigger film and more successful film Gladiator with Russell Crowe. So it has some of those little echoes built in with it in terms of location. So it is described in Wikipedia as a project begun in 2007, and it is a universal purchase of a spec script, and it focuses on a point of view that makes a sympathetic Sheriff of Nottingham, and that's sort of interesting, if only because it kind of reprises certain other kinds of ideas. I think that Ridley Scott is always interested in, sort of the problem of tragic cops. I think is always underlying most Ridley Scott films. I don't mean to reduce his work to that, but it does seem that he chooses cops with tragic flaws, and the Sheriff of Nottingham is certainly a cop with a tragic flaw. A variety of them, and that are remain in the script, even though the script was worked over many times by different screenwriters, giving us a kind of hodgepodge that some people didn't appreciate. It wasn't. It's not a tight film in that sense. I mean, it suffers from things like perhaps he was running out of money when he was doing his big battle scenes, whereas the front end battle scene's a good one. The ending battle scene is really substandard from a major motion picture director point of view. So there's lots of things that are wrong with the film, and I mean, it made a profit, but not a very good profit, and which in the considering how much the film cost, and in the eyes of the usual studios, probably was very problematic. I think it will make up more money, certainly in syndication, blah blah blah, blah, or whatever, in distribution in a variety of forms, and because it is also a star vehicle and has interesting performances, some of which are funny and amusing, and it has the elements of Robin Hood films, merry men. In other words, there always should be a kind of element of humor built into the plots of these Robin Hood things. That is, that it's not simply predation of one kind or another, whether it's the predation of the monarchy or the predation of banditry. It has all of those elements in it. So you could say that the Sheriff of Nottingham is the cop from American Gangster. Let's put it that way. That's one way you could look at it, among many. Casting Crowe in the title role, Ridley Scott was hired to direct later that same year. Rewrites, 2 years of rewriting, and eventually getting it kind of worked through, but dislocated from the notion of Nottingham as this sort of site that is a constant for all of the different versions of Robin Hood, and I'll talk a bit about that in a second. Excuse me. I'll show this if you can hopefully see this. I think sound is on.
Hear me! Hear me! By royal decree, Robin Longstride, also known as Robin of the Hood, and all who shelter him or aid him are declared outlaws of the realm. The property is forfeit, and their lives shall be taken by any Englishman on sight. A nail, please, and a hammer. A nail!
And so, like most cops, precision shooting does them in. There's a kind of buffoonish element to the Sheriff of Nottingham in the Robin Hood, the Ridley Scott Robin Hood. Much more evil is the Sheriff of Nottingham in, for example, the Errol Flynn version, etc. And then you have an additional evil characters that are added or subtracted from the text, and of course made quite scurry by Kevin Costner and Mel Brooks. So this is a diverse text, but it is a kind of model of thought that there is a honorable or a dignified way of being a criminal. And this whole question of criminal in opposition to the law and what is the actual real law. And if there is a bad rulers that have been put in place, will there be a return of good law? And that's the kind of general story. It has woven within it other things, extortion, the long history of whether it was King John or King Edward, and all these other things that are part of the 12th and 13th century kind of construction of the original text. But there is, in the 21st century, a Robin Hood business model. It's an interesting model because it does have this conferring a kind of positive status on neoliberal capitalist predation. And that is, the Bankman-Fried FTX model is a kind of, that there was some sort of ethical altruism, that there was a good capitalism that would provide what is essentially still trickle-down theory. It's really the same wealth building that goes on in the Middle Ages and the transition from feudalism to capitalism. It's all the same damn stuff. It's just sort of branded, as it were, with a variety of this practice of selling a product or service to the wealthy at a premium price while offering at a discounted rate to those less fortunate. This is it's sort of the inverse of surge pricing. It's commonly referred to as the Robin Hood business model. The bulk of profits are generated from the affluent customer base, while serving the less privileged serves as a means of achieving economies of scale that the competitors may struggle to match. So it is a kind of predatory pricing against, in other words, you've identified an audience or a set of consumers who you discount stuff to, and this is actually serves as predation. This is, with respect, a version of the dollar store kind of model of production, very Walmartish in that sense. It has a certain element of that. Not that we think that Walmart is like Robin Hood. Let's not think that way. Anyway, additionally, providing aid to the less fortunate can enhance a company's image in the public eye. This is a philanthropic kind of sidelight that we often see. It's the sort of, heart of gold capitalists. When Trump goes into the Burger King, and my goodness, there are all these black people smiling and happy to receive Donald Trump's order for a shitload of burgers. In emulation of the legendary Robin Hood, companies that adopt this philosophy strive to provide access to goods and services that would otherwise be out of reach for the economically disadvantaged. The revenues generated from sales to the wealthy are used to cross-subsidize access for the less privileged, who may receive the offering at a greatly reduced cost or even gratis. Through this support, both the disadvantaged and the wealthy can benefit, with the latter able to take solace in their philanthropy. And so there's an interesting element to this idea that you could democratize certain kinds of things like price. You could democratize ownership. That's the kind of model that we think of in terms of kind of a Ralph Nader sort of, buying shares of the corporation, rethinking what the public ownership of private capital is in that context. And then, of course, thinking of it even in a bigger fiscal sense with MMT, for example. Now, what I consider to be, what I found as a useful little compendium of the historical state of Robin Hoodism as a story in English. Is Robin Hood and Other Outlaw Tales by Stephen Knight and Thomas Olgren. It's about 800 pages long. It's like capital. The point is that it is, of course, an amalgam of stories. There's no true historical, from a historical materialist point of view, there is no true Robin Hood. There are names that resemble it. The potential that Robin Hood is a kind of generic term for outlaws at some moment as well, without getting into the deep etymological areas. I think it is important to think of the historical context, and there is historical context, and that is worthy of our discussion within the context of Don Munro's land rent, urban studies stuff, and Marx. So common to most of the stories is the question of people who are trying to sustain their lives in the little forest called Sherwood, and within the context of Nottingham. And a part of it is supposedly a royal forest. And so a royal forest, this then comes about at the same time. So it's actually sort of fits the story. The royal forest was an area of land designated to the king for hunting and forestry. It included woodland, heathland, and agricultural land. As of the 12th century, nearly a third of England's territory was assigned as royal forest. Now, this whole question of monarchical ownership of England is still an interesting problem. When we talk about that some of them. Only the king and other permitted members of the nobility were allowed to hunt game in the assigned area. And this folds over into the other issues that are problematic relative to the British maintaining certain types of sports, the fascination for blood sports, and the encyclicals against it, and the problems now of game hunting and cruelty to the poor damn fox, et cetera, et cetera. To maintain this restriction, forest law was introduced to enforce the boundaries. I think there's really good, an amusing, perhaps even geographical analysis, but that's not something I'm going to do. Special officials known as foresters were in charge of overseeing forest law. This is policing in the broad context, and no different than policing in the American context, which is designed to constrain marginalized populations. Largely, the police is a kind of a property. They're mall cops. There's nothing but mall cops. It's been like that. So even gun control really was designed to control Black people who may happen to get control of guns in the American Civil War context. The foresters were among the most hated of royal officials, as they were often corrupt, having a reputation for making illegal side profits on royal forest property by farming, extracting natural resources, and poaching game. Geez, sounds certainly a lot like certain, colonial capitalists, mercantilism in some ways. Pretty much the bad people, the bad guys. They extracted many punishments for poaching game, farming, and other illegal activities on the royal forest. Heavy fines and imprisonment were the common discipline. While foresters were in charge of the upkeep of forest laws, sometimes the king would employ the local sheriff to get involved. Hunting, however, was not the only function for the royal forest. Kings would also use these territories for cattle upbringing, farming, and extracting the land's resources. Now, recall that this is replicated at a manorial level, right? So, if you were a baron or something, you're pretty much doing the same damn thing with the land that you control, that has been given to you or ceded to you by the king, blah, 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 blah. So you can see that the structure of this is replicated up and down. And as I've used Downton Abbey as an example, you can see exactly the same structural problem built into the Downton Abbey text. They also notably served as reserves for all kinds of wildlife. So there is this question of preservation, this idea of forest reserves, of animal preserves, being built into that kind of context. And that's carried over into the so-called New World, right? And as a matter of kind of colonial expansion in the American context, I mean, you could see that this idea is kind of in Teddy Roosevelt's mind, and thinking about national forests and parks, etc. Uh, King Henry I of England was known for having a fascination with pet animals. The idea of acquiring the exotic, of course, is a kind of you could say that it extends all the way up into Orientalism, etc. This idea of that natural history in some ways is an acquisitive, a kind of primitive accumulation in that context. His parks included wild animals like lions and leopards, and in the history of the Tower of London, etc., has lots of animal stuff, zoo-like elements in it. Forest laws in regards to hunting created class distinction. That's the whole business there, right? The same kind of hierarchies that we see in nature become replicated in the human context. King Richard II of England issued the first game law in 1390. It constituted a property requirement of certain value to have hunting dogs or other hunting equipment. So this is a kind of, it's a all of these things are sort of measures of wealth in that particular context. And so against that, we see the history in the Robin Hood tale of poaching. Common Act, it's organized, all kinds of folks engaged in poaching, even and you can see this in the Robin Hood text, that everybody's pretty much taking shit from everyone else. And of course, it's a question of power. Question of whether you had more force in order to seize stuff relative to the serfs, right? Serfs and vassals, etc. Game would not be the only item poached from royal forests. And then there's, of course, wood. Recall that Mark's initial conversation about the Silesian wood, the issue of needing wood supplies, and that there's rules against picking up loose wood for your own use. There's a branch and it's on the ground, and I should be able to take that and go use it to help cook food and stuff. But if you're on, royal land or public land, you could get screwed for, and being in possession of this kind of shit. Anyway, that did fascinate Marx himself in the early Marx. Many sought after its resources, with wood in particular a highly sought commodity. Often the arresting of poachers did not end cleanly. It's sort of an understatement. Poachers would resist arrest, sometimes resorting to assaulting and shooting foresters to escape. There's a recorded instance of St. Thomas Becket performing a miracle by healing a forester shot in the throat by poachers. Note, of course, that people getting shot in the throat is actually a pretty interesting and problematic element introduced in many a medieval cinematic tale. Sometimes nobility would engage in poaching by either taking more game than permitted or by hunting in a restricted area. So this thing and this idea of the king's land, it goes all the way up into the 19th century. This is, is a big, and we know now that it still is a problem about what land are you going to use? You're going to use Ministry of Defense lands for your hunting, blah, 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 blah. And it has to do with class and all those other things. So I came across a thing that on Ben Burgess, or as Davy Mammal refers to him, Ben Bourgeois, his Substack, he talks about sort of that there are kind of two distinctions there, and in some ways only two distinctions of approaching Marxist capital. It's a cute thing to write about, but in fact oversimplifies the real problem of labor theory of value versus non-labor theory of value, and doesn't really quite situate it in a much larger cultural discourse. That's perhaps because Ben is trained as an analytic philosopher, and despite his claims to Marxist ideology, tends to these kinds of relatively simple distinctions to sort of get the literary point across. Now, and he's recently done a whole thing of on G.A. Cohen, on Jerry Cohen, who is one of the key people in creating an analytic Marxism that goes back to the 80s, etc. lest you think that that's unimportant, Karl Marx's theory of history relative to historical materialism is an important a key kind of through line through which we constantly struggle and fight. It is the key point against which we try to define where our ideological positions occur, our position on crisis, our position on revolution, our issues with the class struggle. All of those things are there. Now, what Burgess decides to do is to talk a little bit about using Jerry Cohen's little, 2x2 matrix here of that, and it's a way you could talk about this, but it's much more complicated if you have been doing along with the rest of us looking at how much more complicated it is. It is not as simple as one thinks. And in fact, to define it simply does not, it kind of shortchanges the cultural question. But anyway, so the vertical, the rows are under feudalism and under capitalism, and the column is that surplus product is extracted, is or isn't evident, that is concealed or isn't concealed. Under feudalism, surplus product is extracted, and you can sort of see it's being extracted. Under capitalism, the extraction is concealed. Well, yes and no. I mean, this is problematic in general, because I think with a little bit of analysis, you can pretty much see there's not much concealment. And then when you try to conceal it, you get fucked. I mean, that's what Trump is the current Trump problem in his legal problems is in fact, the impossibility of concealment of certain nefarious activity. And it becomes incredibly problematic because it has to do with marriages, it has to do with, property, it has to do with overthrowing the government. It's all there. And so its concealment is unsuccessful. And in fact, weirdly unsuccessful. That human relations are utilitarian. Now, this is an interesting and a problematic division, but we will refer to it. Trying to sort this out requires a lot of reading of Cohen to sort of see where he's going with this, because in some ways he has a whole other agenda going on. Anyway, under feudalism, human relations are utilitarian. That is, all of our interrelations are clearly there. That we have to deal with everyone. Even if they're a different class. That is, under feudalism, there's a concealed set of relations that. We're no longer, those of us who are serfs are not equal to, our betters. Under capitalism, human relations are utilitarian is evident. Not so much. I would, you could say that they're evident, but, there's other things that are very concealed. For example, status is a real problem in America. It's like some people are so insecure about their children that they're willing to spend, if they have enough wealth, they're willing to cheat, poach, in order to get their kids into schools that have more status. And it's just, it's subject to an entire range of false consciousness. And so when you go to the Varsity Blues scandal of more or less famous people, or at least some rich people relative to Hollywood, convince themselves that even though they make a fair amount of money as actors, etc., they are willing to spend additional components of their surplus to get their kids into a Ivy League school, for example. And the whole Ivy League thing is, of course, problematic, but it is more fascinating to see how in the Varsity Blues problem, you can see that some people chose a kind of opening, or a typical of lawyers, is to find a loophole where your kid is accepted into, let's say, Harvard as a member of the crew team, even though they can't row a lick. And there's incredible creation of this entire narrative that your child is rows really well and et cetera, but they wind up essentially getting into Harvard because they sort of ride the bench for the crew team. That they never really get a true chance to perform, this is simply a subterfuge, and this happened. And the fact that it's so grossly obvious is what got them got a lot of people, arrested and fined and whatever sanctioned. Um, is it the crew coach at Harvard? Or I can't remember which sports team, but they got a whole house out of it in one case. So anyway, these are uneven developments, and what I was reading and following up on, and Higginbottom was talking about Roy Marini, who's a Brazilian, I think, writes about issues of dependency, and he has a whole new, in his work, he developed certain ideas that create new categories, subcategories for problems of dependency theory. The dependency theory is an outgrowth of certain problems of center periphery and exploitative relations under settler colonialism and post or neocolonialist relations between the North and the South, the global North and global South, throughout a kind of very deep history. And there are a lot of good examples, and it fits a lot of histories, and it's fine, and it's a good piece of analysis. It gets a little in the weeds, but it is, in fact, for some people who are looking at it more closely now, is to be able to reconcile some of the more specific on-the-ground problems that, and to serve a revolutionary purpose in not so much resurrecting, but re-identifying the kind of importance of entire bodies of theoretical research that occur in other countries. The global South has an incredible number of important scholars, and in fact, in some very tedious fields. I know this from semiotics. There's some Argentinian semioticians that have, to me, have identified the best way to approach, in fact, some of these problems, but are unfortunately not well identified within the larger corpus of semiotic theory. But anyway, that's an aside. Robin Hood, in the capitalist case in the 21st century, Robin Hood is a group of people, guys, Stanford graduates, who created, in some ways, the thing that Sam Bankman-Fried is sort of built upon. That is this idea of creating a kind of finance that can be democratized. So, and Robin Hood, of course, being a good brand name. But it is, of course, a continuing problem, and it comes up to be popular during COVID for all the usual kind of COVID-style reasons. The economy was sort of messed up, and you had to sort of figure out new ways to, kind of boost the economy. And so the whole GameStop, AMC, the thing that Trump is being pilloried for good reason, meme stocks like Truth Social, et cetera, are the product of the same kind of activity, where you sort of create, vaporware of stock vaporware, where it's not really worth what it is. Trump is reportedly worth, 1.2 plus billion, but that's all on paper, and it could all go to hell. Now, on the other hand, in another 5 months, he could make a lot of money. Of course, he won't have any place to spend it if he's in the jail, but, we'll see. This business model of farming out client trading orders to high-speed, high-volume trading firms dates back to the very beginning of electronic trading. This is a whole business of people trying to get ahead of the way in which how capital is exchanged. This is kind of volume 3 for Marx. This is where all of the stuff is going on, and as Higginbottom talks about, this is the idea of a kind of meta commodity. We won't refer to it as a meta commodity, but this is simply capital commodities at work. It was invented by none other than Bernie Madoff at his securities firm back in the 1980s. This is important because we recall that Madoff essentially, was arrested. His son committed suicide, blah, 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 blah. These are all kind of they're still Ponzi schemes when you get right down to it, as was Bankman-Fried. So anyway, these are electronic trading, which would pay Fidelity or Charles Schwab to make trades for them. So you have this kind of intermediation of agents who would make the trades. You would just go out and find all the you'd be a tout. You'd be running around finding suckers and get people to sort of get into this. Now, another example of the subversion and the Robin Hood sort of hedge people, capital people makes money is through a practice called payment for order flow, PFOF. When users execute trades on this online platform, Robinhood routes those orders to larger market makers who pay Robinhood for the opportunity to execute the trades. This practice has been a subject of debate and criticism. Needless to say, this is a regulatory problem that is not simply about stock trades, but we can see that this kind of division of organization applies to other kinds of entities and can be made more problematic by a variety of other things like the whole cryptocurrency, et cetera, is kind of has certain elements of this, and it's been made better by certain computing elements, but not fully regulated. So ask any, this is the front end question for one of these Robinhood articles. Ask any audience attending a lecture on Robinhood the following questions. To each, there will be an entirely predictable answer. Who has never read, heard, or even seen A Tale of Robin Hood? And answer, no one. And we've seen this kind of reproduced in a variety of ways. The Lone Ranger, I think is that, blah, blah, blah. There's all these other stories of that. Who has read the stories as an adult other than to children? Answer, nobody. Who has ever read the stories in the original version? Answer is no one. In one form or another, the tales have been told to children by adults who themselves learned them as children. That holds good for the last 200 years, probably for much longer. And in fact, the last 200 years is the time of, the formation of cheap printing and, the penny press and blah, 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 and literacy, orality becoming literacy, has changed. It is thus that the legend has been transmitted and transmuted and has endured. So Robin Hood is this kind of thing that we continue to look at. And this is, this is about all of the things I just talked about. And Hobsbawm was interested in this in terms of social banditry, all of these things. And they are useful in discussing what we have finally come to and to complete. And I, of course, used up too much fucking time, which I'll continue tomorrow. But it is essentially embodied in this idea that is presented by Marx in 1859, I think. In the social production of their existence, men inevitably enter into definite relations which are independent of their will, namely relations of production appropriate to a given stage in the development of their material forces of production. The totality of these relations of production constitutes the economic structure of society, the real foundation on which arises a legal and political superstructure, its base superstructure, and to which correspond definite forms of social consciousness. The mode of production of material that conditions the general process of social, political, and intellectual life. It is not the consciousness of men, people, that determines their existence, but their social existence that determines their consciousness. This is that inversion of the relation between the ideal and the material that Marx represents in terms of talking about Hegel. And lest you think that's unimportant, that's pretty much what goes on in a significant number of kind of popular culture texts that, that are interesting, problematic, and stupid. Heist films, for example, are the ultimate in stupid kind of popular construction, but they're funny and they're worth watching, and they have famous people in them, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And people can make lots of money. The Oceans 11, 12, 13, and 8, I think are the examples that we could entertain ourselves with all of those sets of relations. So the point, of course, is that we're still looking at Don Monroe's Marxist theory of land, rent, and cities. And we talked about land tenure and a variety of other things. And to skip down to where I will probably start reading tomorrow, and you can catch up by reading the front end of this, are questions that have to do with land tenure systems and rent. Let me just read a little bit of this and then we stop, and you could ask questions. Rent is commonly thought of as a payment made by one party, such as a renter, to another, the lessor, that is, person who is making the thing available, whether it's, house or land, for the temporary use of something, such as a dwelling, for shelter, basic shelter. In economics, rent has several other meanings. For political economists such as David Ricardo, rent was the portion of the produce of the earth, which is paid to the landlord for the use of the original and indestructible powers of the soil. Soil science is kind of the key to everything for Marx, and it's certainly clear that he was still interested in this close to his death, mainly because the differential among fertility of land is pretty significant, and a considerable amount of time was spent in the late 19th century pillaging other countries for their nitrogen. That is for bird shit for fertilizer. So these are important issues. I mean, obviously, animals produce fertilizer, humans produce fertilizer, etc. But there's this whole other set of things that are part of that process that become problematic ultimately, but or have not had a sufficient amount of technology to sort of work through the kind of drawbacks of some of those things, the externalities, as for. Ricardo stressed that rent is a distinct payment with its own economic laws, which are unlike the economic laws that describe the payment of wages for labor or profit for the use of capital. These are much more material in that sense. He added that the quantity of rent is determined by the fertility, location, and other advantages of particular plots of land. We'll see this in Marx's development of a differential rent, or the difference between differential rent and absolute rent, or whether it exists at all. What then is the source of rent, if not the fertility of soil? Marx shows rent always originates with and is extracted from the direct producers who work the land, be they slaves, serfs, peasants, or farm laborers, some of versions of which still exist to this day. We had a person that we were interacting with the other night at the TPF that had connections to Central Valley farm laborers, which was really fascinating. Anyway, chapters 3, 4, and 5 in particular will explore in detail how rent results from the social relations in which the exploitation of the land takes place. This idea of exploitation, gaining a kind of use, producing value from certain things, how that takes place. And so this building of a more abstract concept of value on top of things like land and commodities and money, etc., are all important to Marx. Another key concept is at the heart of Marx's explanation of land and rent is that of value, including the measurement of value. In all societies, irrespective of their mode of production, people exchange goods and services with each other. With friends and family, for example, these exchanges may be based on reciprocal sharing arrangement or a unilateral gift giving. However, economic exchanges, such as the exchange of labor for wages or access to land for rent, are much more complex exchanges, and unlike exchanges with family and friends, typically involves transfers between strangers, or this is that moment when your family becomes strangers. Or if you've won the lottery, where all your stranger-like family become family members again. The classical political economists noted that in the economy, people generally exchange goods and services of equal value. The question then arose, what is the source of value and how can it be measured? Adam Smith, David Ricardo, John Stuart Mill, and Thomas Malthus developed the labor theory of value to explain how economic exchanges occurred. The labor theory of value, the LTV theory, holds that goods and services exchanged on the basis of their value, that is, the amount of labor measured as labor time. Remember, we looked at this before about whether it was really labor time or it was the potential that represented by labor time. This is an interesting problem. It was necessary to produce the goods and services. The benefits of the labor theory of value include it is measurable in units of labor hours spent producing a commodity. Labor time is a relatively stable measure of value in markets and can be used to analyze the GDP of nations, and labor measures of value can exchange like commodities exchange at a ratio fixed by the relative differences in the labor times used to make the commodities. 1,000 simple products, each made with 5 hours of labor, will be needed to exchange for one complex product made with 5,000 hours of labor. Now, this is problematic because, they don't necessarily, convert very well. And this is a problem that I've suggested many times before, that we have, because we have advances in technology, we can work through some of these problems a little bit closer. The labor theory of value is clearly different from microeconomic theory, which stipulates economic exchanges occur in a market based on the subjective, non-measurable evaluations of psychological utility or preferences of the buyer and seller, although it does have some relevance to Keynesian economics. So this is altogether very interesting, and there's a whole body of folks who would like to reduce all those kind of behaviors to certain kind of animal spirits that and there is some evidence for it. Oh, okay, if you haven't eaten lunch yet, chances are you might buy a little bit more if you go shopping than if you've had something to eat before you go. And so these simple behavioral things can become much more interesting and problematic at an experimental level. I'll stop right here because I've been yakking too long again. We'll try and get to the second part of this, finish up that little reading section there, and then introduce what I hope will be interesting. I added something that I carried over. Maybe we won't cover it that much, but it is a piece by Bellamy Foster on irrationality. The idea that, and it's still, it's problematic for a lot of people, but it does sort of overlap with this question that Ben Burgess raises, however naively, is this idea of labor theory of value and kind of the irrational elements of trying to think about that relative to utility. He doesn't express it that way, but essentially this is the problem of thinking about Nietzsche, and whether Nietzsche is even important at all. But Nietzsche has been around. The study of Nietzsche relative to certain French post-structural theory has been around for now 40 some odd years, and it's worth considering some elements of it because it kind of overlays. It can be overlaid with Bellamy Foster's thinking about science. So it's important to sort of see these things at work. Partially because you actually, if you're a good Marxist, you can have a certain position on this that doesn't have these people who sort of maybe gone over the edge on the humanist Marx, and you sort of need to sort of get a position on this at some moment because it can really go over the edge and not become useful. But that is, in fact, the one of the serious divisions that the Ben Burgess thing actually raises is a certain kind of humanist relation to that. So coming this Sunday, I think we'll try and do it. Don't worry if you're going to fall behind. This is something, it takes a while to sort of get through this, but there is yesterday in Weekly Marx, we looked at the issues of capitalist production, volume 1, the kind of Hegelian elements, but also the material elements. And I like thinking that Higginbottom's approach allows us to bring all these things together and not make them fly apart, and bring the multiple totalities together in one sense. And his beginning in discussing volume 2 of Capital is a means by which you can sort of see how one leads to the other. And it's not perfect. It probably could have used a study guide. And Engels tried to write a study guide, and he kind of screwed it up. I mean, it makes some sense, but it's got a lot of gaps in it. So this is from the CSSGI website. If you're at all personally interested in it, they're monthly volume 2 lectures. I keep missing them. They're at 6:30. I'm not sure, 6:30. I don't know. They're at weird times. Let's just put it that way. And I am usually I'm not able to make these meetings. But there is a volume 2 lecture, of which we're up to lecture 3, I think. And there are don't follow the dates here. This is the projected dates that Higginbottom had for studying the remainder in 2024 of volume 2 of Marx's Capital. In 2025, assuming we're all alive still, he will be doing the same thing for volume 3. So it is a continuing project, one worth, I'm sure that, I'm not sure that he will answer questions if you pose it to him over at Kingston U, but it would be amusing to sort of get him engaged with us for a brief couple of minutes, and I hope we will do that in the future. I included a video that connects by the one author who sort of brought back this text on dialectics of dependency, Amanda Latimer, who's at Kingston, the same place that Higginbottom is at. So that's kind of interesting. So there's a YouTube for that if you're at all interested. And if you have a particular interest in Latin America or the generalized questions about dependency theory, which while for some problematic still, is takes up a broad, probably a 10 to 20 year component of economic development theory for the global South. And it's not to be forgotten. It is a different way of thinking in the sense that property is different. I mean, it is different. The whole land question that Monroe will get to tells us that, everything that we sort of complain about and worry about and blah, 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 rent and land and blah, 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 it's all conditioned by being in the global North. And so a lot of these things, while they may work in cities in the global South, they don't quite work for whole countries in the global South. There's just all kinds of other different things. The histories were screwed up, land reform, another problem, contradicted, and there's all kinds of other issues that would be more easily solved in the global North. In the global South, they remain stupid and somehow impossible to fix. So anyway, on the other hand, there are good things on which to build revolutionary movements, the good and bad of it, of course, in terms of the lumpen. So that kind of completes my little overview of that. So we'll talk more about this tomorrow. I'll try and finish off this chapter 2 introduction. I probably may introduce chapter 3 at some moment. But the chapters 1 and 2 are very foundational for doing the Monroe text and are broadly applicable for the general project of trying to work through, that's what we've been doing week upon week, is the kind of reading of Marx to understand that it isn't an alien form of analysis, and in fact allows us to look at pretty much everyday life as, as a reasonable sort of revolutionary subject. And we can see this at pretty much everything that we do. Okay, so I've talked enough. It's time for you to talk.
Hi, Lee.
Nate.
Firstly, I am coming to you from Sherwood Forest.
There we go.
It's weirdly enough, there's a freeway 100 feet away, but there you go.
There you go.
No, the two
Holy
questions.
shit, Nate. Cut your fucking beard off, dog. What the hell, man? Sorry for interrupting. You
It's
threw
all
me
right.
for a loop, yo. You threw me for a fucking loop.
Not just my beard, not only my
Yeah.
beard.
Yeah, looking good, man. Looking real good. Yeah, still got your hair and stuff. Yeah, sorry for interrupting, but yeah, you just kind of threw me off there. So
Oh, that's all right. It's all right.
I know we talked about doing it. I know you talked about doing it at one point. So I guess you did it. That's cool, man.
I
I no
finally
longer
did it.
believe in anything.
What's that? Oh, I see. Yeah.
What
Well,
the fuck
5
isn't
years
real?
of growing that out and living with it has really rewarded me with a wealth of reaction upon
Yeah,
taking it off. So it was worth it.
marvelous.
Who's that?
It's took years off you, Nate.
That's exactly why I did it. That's exactly why I did it. But maybe talk about that later. I want to ask Lee. I would love a little elaboration on the Sheriff of Nottingham as a tragic cop. I think the book I had as a kid for Robin Hood was probably pretty watered down. I don't remember him as much more than a buffoon. And then the other question is pretty small, but I think I heard you just say something about a Central Valley farm worker. Were they on our Zoom or somewhere else?
No, some people can back me up on this. We were in a breakout room for TPF. a thing up for TPF, and there were a couple of folks. One person from Baltimore, the other person was from somewhere in the Central Valley, and it's just interesting to chat with them. That's all. That
Yeah. Okay. Well, I missed out.
it was.
And the sheriff.
Oh, the sheriff. Yeah, the sheriff is can be the the sort of car 54 version of cops. That is Gunther and what's the guy? One is Gunther, and the other one is what? Tootie? Can't remember. There is a program called Car 54. It's a comedy, and it's kind of like it's Barney Miller, except about the street cops as opposed to the detectives.
Car 54, where are you? Wasn't that Fred Gwynn who played
Yes.
the Munster,
Right.
father? Yeah.
Was it? I mean, was it as? I mean, I consider Barney Miller to be pretty incisive. Was it like that, or was it just more silly?
It's more silly.
Okay.
I mean, there is this sort of Brooklyn Nine-Nine version of cops, and then there's the other versions of cops.
Well, you know why I watch all these DUI videos online is like you could watch the equivalent of Cops 24/7 now.
Yes. Well, it is on 24/7. There's a program that has live feeds from cop activity.
Yeah.
It's
But
really frightening, actually. But
oh, it is. I mean, the privacy implications are nuts. The
Yes.
people having the worst days of their lives that are being watched by millions. I feel guilty, and I feel very happy that my worst encounters happened before all this.
let's just say that it needs to be regulated. But
I agree.
self-regulated or whatever. Joe,
Yes.
shall we shut off the stream? I guess. Let's.
Unless we have any other questions, I believe that'll be all.
Okie dokie.
Going
Did you say TPA? What is that?
The
TPF
People's Forum.
People's Forum. There was a thing on Saturday of trying to sort of close out the course, the National Liberation course. And, people were sort of arbitrarily organized into groups. And so TAC got organized into a group with two other people, and some of us who were online participated. And
Oh wow! Who else was in on it?
So it was our Zoom logged into their Zoom.
Mm-hmm. but the breakaway thing.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, who was? Yeah, I'm just asking who was there. I'm curious.
Well, let me close the stream off here. So this and that information every day at 5 p.m. every weekday at 5.
Yep, every weekday, Monday through Friday. Be